Forget everything you thought you knew about reality television drama, celebrity scandals, and carefully curated public images. Because what unfolded inside that courtroom was not just another headline. It wasn't just gossip. It wasn't just another messy celebrity dispute. It was the kind of moment that shifts narratives, fractures reputations, and forces the world to re-examine everything it thought it understood about power, loyalty, and truth. What started as a custody hearing quickly spiraled into something far more explosive, a public unraveling that left fans stunned, social media in flames, and three very familiar names standing at the center of chaos: Todd Tucker, Porsha Williams, and Kandi Burruss. At first glance, it was supposed to be procedural, a routine legal appearance. Lawyers present, cameras stationed outside, supporters whispering in corners. But beneath the polished suits and composed expressions, something volatile was brewing. Tension hung thick in the air, the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Nobody expected what would happen next, and certainly nobody expected the receipts that would allegedly change everything. The courtroom was silent in that unsettling way that only high-profile hearings can be. Reporters sat poised, fingers hovering over keyboards, waiting for anything, even the smallest spark, that might ignite a story. Todd Tucker sat upright, shoulders squared, projecting the calm and measured persona the public had come to associate with him. His expression was controlled, almost unreadable, as if he believed this was simply another hurdle to clear. Across from him, Porsha Williams appeared steady, composed, but undeniably sharp. There was intention behind every movement, every glance. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't shrinking. She seemed prepared. And then there was Kandi Burruss. Quiet, observant, calculated. For much of the early proceedings, she said very little. She watched, she listened, she let others speak. And that silence, that deliberate patience, would later become the most powerful weapon in the room. The dispute centered around custody, a topic already emotionally charged and deeply personal. For years, the public narrative had been clear. Todd and Kandi had adopted and were raising 2 children together. It was presented as a united front, a family story, a shared responsibility. But in court that day, Porsha challenged that narrative. She alleged that the truth was far more complicated, that the children's parentage had been misrepresented, that arrangements had been made under questionable circumstances, and that the public had only ever seen a carefully constructed version of events. Her words weren't loud, but they were pointed. Every sentence felt deliberate, aimed. Gasps rippled quietly through the gallery, and that was the moment the temperature in the room began to rise. When Kandi finally spoke, it wasn't gradual, it wasn't tentative, it was decisive. Her voice cut through the courtroom with force. "These children are mine." The declaration landed like a thunderclap. Hands slammed against the table, chairs scraped across the floor. The carefully maintained composure that had defined the morning cracked wide open. For nearly a decade, the public believed one story. Now, in a matter of seconds, that story was being dismantled piece by piece. Porsha held her ground, asserting that what the public had been told was incomplete, that private agreements and personal understandings had been manipulated. The exchange grew heated. The judge repeatedly called for order. Microphones shifted. Reporters leaned forward. The air buzzed with adrenaline. And then, Kandi did something that shifted the entire atmosphere. She reached into her purse and removed a small USB drive. Unassuming, simple, almost ordinary. But what it allegedly contained was anything but. When Kandi handed the USB to the judge, her voice was steady but charged with emotion. This shows everything that happened behind closed doors. Skepticism flickered across faces, but curiosity won. The USB was plugged in, the courtroom lights dimmed slightly as attention turned to the screen. What followed, according to those present, stunned the room. The footage allegedly showed private home surveillance clips, heated confrontations, raised voices, physical altercations, chaos unfolding while children were present in the background. The kind of footage that doesn't just shift perception, it detonates it. If authentic, it painted a picture of instability and aggression that sharply contrasted with the composed public image many had associated with Todd. The courtroom erupted. Attorneys objected. Voices overlapped. The judge pounded the gavel repeatedly, demanding order. But outside the courtroom walls, something even louder was happening. Social media had already ignited. Hashtags began trending within minutes. Hashtag Todd exposed. Hashtag Kandi speaks. Hashtag courtroom chaos. Clips and summaries spread like wildfire. Commentary flooded timelines. Supporters rallied behind Kandi, calling her courageous for revealing what they described as receipts. Others urged caution, reminding viewers that footage can be edited, context can be missing, and allegations require verification. The internet split into camps almost instantly. Just when it seemed the drama had peaked, another twist emerged. The USB, according to statements made in court, contained more than just footage of conflict. It allegedly hinted at deeper concerns, communications about financial arrangements, discussions surrounding assets, and potential strategies tied to custody and inheritance planning. The implications were enormous. If true, this wasn't just about personal disputes. It was about control, influence, planning, strategy. The judge's expression reportedly shifted from irritation to concern. This will require further investigation, he stated, according to observers. Todd, once composed, now appeared visibly shaken. His attorney attempted to redirect the focus, questioning the admissibility and authenticity of the material. Legal arguments began flying across the room, but Kandi wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly and said something that would echo far beyond those walls. This is only the beginning. After a brief recess, one that felt anything but calm, proceedings resumed. And then came the second bombshell. Kandi presented another USB drive, this one marked clearly with her initials. The courtroom once again fell silent. The second set of footage allegedly included scenes of documents being handled, hidden, or discussed in ways that raised serious legal questions. Observers described clips suggesting custody-related paperwork, financial documents, and communications with unnamed individuals whose identities remain unclear. Children's voices were reportedly heard in the background in portions of the footage, distressed, confused, pleading for calm. The emotional weight in the room intensified. Even Portia, who had entered the hearing with a confident stance, appeared momentarily caught off guard by the direction events had taken. If the first USB shook the room, the second one destabilized it. Outside, social media exploded again. Some users declared Kandi a hero. Others questioned timing and motive. Was this a calculated strategy? Was this self-defense? Was it both? Memes flooded platforms. Commentary live streams dissected every detail. Influencers debated authenticity. News outlets began covering the story with cautionary language, emphasizing that allegations remain unproven until verified in court. But the public perception shift was undeniable. As the hearing neared adjournment, just when it seemed there was no oxygen left in the room, Kandi delivered one final statement. "There's another recording," she said quietly, "and it's bigger than both." Cameras zoomed in. Todd's expression reportedly drained of color. Portia's eyes flicked toward the judge. The judge, visibly fatigued by the escalation, called for adjournment pending further review. And just like that, the doors opened, but the story didn't end. It multiplied. However, it dismantled the image he had spent an entire decade building. 15 seconds. That's all it took. 15 seconds of his own voice, steady and voluntary, echoing through courtroom speakers. 15 seconds that turned strategy into self-sabotage. And in that instant, every warning Mama Joyce had voiced over the years suddenly felt less like paranoia and more like prophecy. This wasn't just a divorce hearing, it was exposure. It was narrative collapse. And once you understand what those 15 seconds revealed, you may never look at their marriage or the story they told the public the same way again. For months leading up to that courtroom confrontation, the public believed Kandi and Todd were handling their separation with dignity. There were no explosive interviews, no messy social media battles, no dramatic unfollows or cryptic Instagram captions. Just a quiet filing on November 21st, 2025, paperwork submitted without spectacle, without emotional theatrics, without the kind of chaos that typically defines celebrity breakups. On the surface, it looked mature, two adults deciding to move forward separately, a peaceful uncoupling, a chapter closing gently. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes silence is preparation. Because behind that filing wasn't confusion or heartbreak, it was clarity. And behind Todd's response wasn't devastation, it was strategy. What initially appeared to be a graceful separation quickly revealed itself to be something colder and far more calculated. The moment court proceedings began, the illusion didn't slowly fade, it exploded. What had been framed as a mutual decision to part ways transformed into a legal battlefield where every word felt sharpened and every move appeared premeditated. This wasn't about love dying, it was about intentions being exposed. It was about power shifting. It was about a narrative carefully maintained for years, collapsing under the weight of contradiction. When Todd walked into that first hearing, he didn't look like a man grieving a lost marriage. He looked focused, composed, intent. His legal team arrived prepared with binders thick enough to suggest that this wasn't a spontaneous reaction to Kandi's filing. It felt rehearsed, structured, activated. When the judge asked for preliminary motions, Todd's side didn't hesitate. They requested full custody. They sought spousal support. They pursued child support. And then they launched what would become the central pillar of their argument, a challenge to the prenuptial agreement. The claim was that Todd had been pressured into signing it just one day before the wedding, that he had no independent legal counsel, that he had been cornered into a contract he didn't fully understand. Words like forced, manipulated, and unfair were introduced into the record, carefully chosen to generate sympathy and plant doubt. But there was something unsettling about the delivery. Todd didn't sound wounded. He didn't sound confused. He sounded prepared. There was no tremble in his voice, no visible vulnerability. It felt less like a confession and more like step one in a long constructed plan. And while he spoke, Kandi remained still, not defensive, not reactive, just steady. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from shock, it comes from certainty. The judge noticed it too. As the hearings continued, the courtroom became less about legal arguments and more about excavation. Past rumors resurfaced, this time not as gossip, but as documented testimony. The infamous Portia situation was referenced formally. Old tensions that once played out under the umbrella of reality television were now being discussed under oath. Conversations once dismissed as storyline drama were being re-examined as evidence of deeper fractures within the marriage. Todd's legal team attempted to introduce whispers of alleged affairs, trying to blur accountability and distribute blame. It was a classic tactic, muddy the narrative enough so that no single storyline appears definitive. But with every attempt to redirect focus, something became clearer. This marriage hadn't suddenly broken in 2025. It had been cracking quietly for years. Then, Mama Joyce's name entered the discussion, and the room shifted. For years, she had publicly questioned Todd's intentions. Critics labeled her overbearing, suspicious, territorial. But now, her past statements were resurfacing not as family drama, but as contextual evidence. Todd's team suggested her distrust created pressure around the prenup, that her interference contributed to imbalance. Kandi's legal team countered with a sharper truth. Mama Joyce didn't distrust him out of ego. She sensed something transactional where partnership should have existed. She saw opportunity where there should have been alignment. And once that word opportunity entered the air, it lingered longer than any objection.
Then the daughters became part of the proceedings. Riley Burruss spoke with quiet restraint, but her words carried weight. She described feeling like she was constantly being compared to Kayla, that she never truly felt embraced as a daughter, but rather tolerated as part of the structure. There was no dramatics in her voice, only fatigue. Kayla Tucker defended her father fiercely. She insisted he tried, that he was misunderstood, that he never intended harm. But beneath her defense was visible frustration, not just at Kandi, but at the fractured family dynamic that had forced her into the role of defender in the first place. The judge listened carefully. What became evident wasn't a once stable household falling apart. It was a divided home finally acknowledging what had always existed beneath the surface. The unity the public believed in may have been more performance than foundation.
And then came the moment that changed everything. Todd requested DNA tests for Ace and Blaze. The air left the room. It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it was heavy. Kandi's reaction wasn't explosive, it was stunned, as if the words had physically struck her. Todd didn't look at her, he didn't look at the judge, he stared straight ahead. The man who had raised those children, celebrated birthdays, shared family photos, played the role of father, now questioning paternity in open court. Sympathy evaporated instantly. Neutrality dissolved. This was no longer strategic positioning. It felt personal. It felt like leverage disguised as legal procedure. And once that line was crossed, there was no returning to the earlier narrative of respectful separation. But even that wasn't the final blow. When Todd's lawyer repeated the prenup pressure argument for what felt like the 100th time, the judge turned to Kandi with a simple question. Do you have evidence to counter this claim? She didn't hesitate. She unlocked her phone, opened a hidden folder, selected a file that had never been publicly shared. The speakers activated. Todd's voice filled the room. Calm, clear, certain. I'm good. I want to sign this. No pressure. I love you. I'm doing the right thing. 15 seconds. The silence afterward was suffocating. Todd's expression shifted in a way no argument could correct. His lawyer's confidence collapsed. The judge leaned forward, replayed the audio, and everything Todd had constructed as a narrative of coercion disintegrated in real time. There was no interpretation needed. The prenup challenge fell apart. The divorce was finalized. Custody remained with Kandi. The legal chapter ended swiftly, but the fallout was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, Kandi didn't speak. She didn't celebrate. She walked forward with the posture of someone who had already processed the loss long before the verdict was stamped. Todd followed later, visibly shaken, not because the marriage ended, but because the strategy failed publicly. The 15-second recording spread rapidly. Commentary channels dissected his tone. Analysts broke down the timing. And then a new detail surfaced. The DNA request had been drafted in advance. It wasn't emotional impulse, it was planned. That revelation shifted public opinion permanently. Fans revisited old episodes, reanalyzed past comments about money, assets, backup plans. The pattern seemed clearer in hindsight. The prenup wasn't an attack, it was protection. The custody push wasn't about devotion, it was leverage. And once that perception settled, the image Todd had carefully curated couldn't be restored. But the part that never trended online was the emotional aftermath for the children, the confusion, the questions, the trust fracture that doesn't resolve with a court ruling. Legal decisions finalize contracts, they don't heal emotional wounds. This story wasn't about who yelled louder, it wasn't about who won the argument, it was about intention. Todd didn't challenge the prenup for years, only when divorce became real. He didn't question paternity during anniversaries, only when leverage mattered. Speculation erupted across every platform. What could possibly be on a third recording? Who else might be implicated? Are there broader industry connections? Is this purely a custody dispute that spiraled out of control? Or is it something much more complex? The world was left hanging.
What makes this saga so captivating isn't just the allegations themselves, it's the layers: public image versus private reality, power dynamics, trust fractured in real time, the way narratives can shift in a single afternoon. But it's also important to remember something crucial: allegations are not verdicts. Courtrooms exist to determine facts. Evidence must be authenticated. Context matters. Legal processes take time. Right now, what the public has is a storm of claims, footage under review, and a case that is far from resolved. What happens next will depend not on hashtags, but on investigation. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think this was a strategic reveal? Do you believe more footage will surface? Is this about custody or control? Are you Team Kandi? Team Portia? Waiting for Todd's response? Or just here watching the narrative unfold? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you're following every twist in this unfolding courtroom saga, hit that like button. Subscribe so you don't miss the next update. Because if another recording surfaces, you already know this story will escalate again. One thing is certain: this isn't over. And the next chapter, it might just break the internet. Do you like this personality?